You might know how to walk like an Egyptian, but do you know how to dress like an Egyptian? Hi, my name is Amandine Mérat. I'm an Egyptologist and an expert in ancient Egyptian textiles. And welcome to my corner! So, today if I tell you ancient Egypt, you will tell me, oh, sculpture from pharaohs, temples, or maybe walk like an Egyptian? Well, I'm gonna introduce you to another period of Egyptian story and also another kind of material. Today we're gonna say dress like an Egyptian and we're gonna talk about textiles in ancient Egypt from the 7th century to the 15th century AD. Egypt has a long tradition in textile production which dates back to the 4th millennium BC. Where in other parts of the world textiles didn't survive, thanks to Egypt's dry climate, textiles survived in abundance. Today the British Museum collection of ancient Egyptian textiles comprises around 500 textiles from the 1st millennium AD, roughly. They mainly come from excavation led at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. They come from graves, because from the 2nd century onward, Egyptians stopped mummifying their dead to bury them in their daily clothes wrapped into furnishing textiles. So the textile we'll look at today are both clothing items and furnishing textiles. So this one here is a fragment of a shawl or a furnishing textile. It's difficult to tell. It has been woven in linen, the main fiber used in Egypt since the 4th millennium BC. As you can see, it is decorated with a band here, which has been woven in tapestry, but this time not in wool, as it was mostly the case during the so-called Coptic period, but in silk. This is doable after the Arab conquest because Arab controlled the Silk Road, and so this makes silk more easily accessible in Egypt. It shows some birds and quadrupeds in vegetal interlacing. This iconography comes back from the classical imagery imported by Greek at the arrival of Alexander the Great during the 4th century BC. However, this piece dates to the 7th or the 8th century and shows the continuation of imagery and iconography throughout the centuries in Egypt. So this shows a transition which will continue, for example, with this piece later on. So this textile is 4 edges preserved. They have been sewn underneath, and the shape indicates that this is a sleeve of a tunic. What is interesting here is that we can find the same iconography here than we found it here, which means the vegetal interlacing and medallions which are housing some animal motifs, here very much stylized. This inscription doesn't read anything. It's a pseudo-inscription, pseudo-Kufic inscription, which is an Arabic script. Such garments bearing such inscription are called tiras, and tiras comes from the Persian word which means embroidery. And tiras was used to describe both the clothes produced at the time, but also the workshop where they were produced. At first, tiras were easily identifiable because of their inscription. The inscription was either naming the caliph or quoting the Quran. Later on, especially from the 9th to the 12th century AD, tiras were also just identifiable by these pseudo-inscription lines, and they could also be not only embroidered but woven in tapestry like this one. Tiras were produced to decorate furnishing textiles or garments. They were mostly found on tunics on sleeves. And at the time, the main item of clothing for men, women, and kids alike was the tunic. And the tunic could be of 2 types at this time. It could be either the traditional tunic, which was adopted after the Roman fashion from the 2nd century AD, which is a tunic which was woven in one piece in a T-shape, folded and sewn along the edges. Or it could be a tunic which was imported from the 7th century AD after the Arab conquest from Eastern countries. And this tunic was made of several pieces of cloth sewn together. So to imagine how this was worn, if you look at my jacket, for example, this part would be that part, and this would come up to here, and these two ends would be sewn along the edge here. So we are now looking at textile from the Mamluk period, which is roughly 13th century to mid-16th century. So I have 3 textiles in front of me, and I'm sure you already can notice some differences from the one we just had a look at. The main difference with the Mamluk is their taste for geometric decoration. And that's why, at this time, the main decoration consists of geometric motifs. So, for example, you can see on this textile tiny triangle motifs. This textile is a pillowcase, and it was found in a grave, as we can notice it through this stain coming from the humor of the body. Geometric decoration can be found on furnishing textiles, but also on clothing items. So in front of me is another example of a sleeve of a tunic. This tunic is probably of the type 2 we described earlier, because under the Mamluk, type 1 is slowly but surely abandoned, and men, women and kids only wore tunic made of several pieces of cloth cut and sewn together. And then you will tell me, but hang on, here there is some patterns, and it's not only geometric. This is true because under the Mamluks, one of the most important signs of high rank in society became the blazon. So a blazon is basically a kind of logo for an emir or a prince. For example, this blazon has been made woven in cotton, one of the most used fiber under the Mamluks. And it was made to decorate a tent of an emir, and it's decorated with a cup, and this cup helps us to know that this emir was the cup bearer at court, which was a very, very high duty under the Mamluks. Thanks for watching my little introduction on fashion in Egypt and textile production. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're gonna look for these textiles in museums now. If you want to see more Curator's Corner, you can find them here.